There's a creepy PC thing out there that really bothers me.
If you do anything wrong in your life, and I find out about it, I'm going to try to take everything away from you.
It's a shame because it's sort of killing comedy because you're not really allowed to joke about anything, which is all it is. It's just a joke. Nobody's done anything or mean anything that they say.
You see enough hypocrisy and you see enough people trying to take people out for commenting on what's sexist and racist and trying to get people fired. Like, it's a time of outrage across the board.
They keep moving the lines in for no reason.
Right.
It seems to be cool and trendy to be
offended by everything.
Right, but that's...
So I recently watched Bill Burr's Netflix special, Paper Tiger, a special that was marketed as Bill unleashing on political correctness and outrage culture. And honestly, the special was pretty good. I quite enjoyed it. Except for the first 20 minutes. Oh man, that first section was really rough, and it almost made me switch off and abandon it because of how bored I was. Now, a lot of that first part was literally Bill just reusing old bits, which is obviously disappointing, but even for the fresh material, it basically consisted of him making predictable comments about outrage culture. And there's funny stuff you can draw from that, but at this point in time, there should at least be like some unique twist to what you're saying other than, man, people these days are too sensitive, am I right?
I don't know what it is. I don't know what the fuck is going on. Everything's so goddamn... Every fucking joke you tell. Well, what did you mean about that? I feel fucking triggered.
I feel like this is the kind of thing you would have heard a million times over in the last 10 years or so, especially if you're on the internet a lot. But I am a fan of Bill's and I have been since about 2012, so I stuck around and I'm glad I did. Because it ended up being a really solid show. So why did I pick on Bill's special here? Because it highlights some of my issues with this broader trend of comedians and their fans who complain about woke PC outrage cancel culture. Now, I do think there are definite issues with online outrage mobs. The proclivity for some people to ignore context or subtext in their pursuit of demonizing someone, or the fact that if you actually want people to learn and improve or change their behavior in some way, that trying to get them fired for being slightly problematic probably does nothing other than breed resentment. Let me just say that despite these issues existing, there's a tendency for people to overblow just how significant they are and how much it personally affects them. It always struck me as odd that you have all these comedians complaining about outrage and cancel culture, talking about how they're policed, about how their voices are being stifled, and they're saying all this to massive sold-out crowds, and with their gajillion-dollar Netflix deals, broadcasting to millions more people.
Because like everything I say on this Netflix special is gonna get me in trouble.
If you say anything, you risk everything.
Really, Morgan Freeman narrating for Dave Chappelle? Are you really risking much more than getting a fatter wallet? Alright, let's be real. Unless you go full Kramer and you start angrily yelling the N-word at black people in the crowd, or saying they should be hanged from trees, you probably aren't getting cancelled or blacklisted to the point where your career is severely hampered or ruined.
I lost my temper on stage. Said some pretty nasty things to some Afro-Americans. A lot of trash talk, and
Stop laughing. It's not funny.
There might be one or two exceptions to this, but for the most part, unless you do something horribly messed up, you're gonna be fine. These guys have huge platforms and die-hard fervent followers who will bat for them in every conceivable scenario. But you'd think the way some of these people go on about it, that celebrities are being dropped left and right.
Celebrity hunting season. Doesn't matter what I say, they're gonna get everybody eventually. Goddamn sick of it. This is the worst time ever to be a celebrity.
So a recent example that people often point to demonstrate supposed crazy cancel culture was the reaction to Dave Chappelle's special Sticks and Stones. Except Chappelle wasn't cancelled. He didn't come near to it. There wasn't even a threat of it being a possibility. He was literally plastered all over Netflix and had huge marketing campaigns about how offensive all this stuff was. Rather than it being shunned into a corner for being too provocative, its supposed offensiveness was used as a selling point to draw more eyes to the show. And overwhelmingly, the wider public seemed to quite enjoy it. Now I'm gonna bring up a concept that seems to confuse some people. I don't know why people seem to be so dense about this, but it's pretty clear to me. And the idea is quite simply that criticizing someone and their content is not always an attempt to cancel them. And in that vein, I'm gonna spend the next few minutes criticizing Chappelle's special. Not cause his material offended my feelings, but because some of it was really, really dumb.
I was doing sketches that were funny, but socially irresponsible. It's like you're getting flooded with things and you don't pay attention to things like your ethics. It was a good spirit or intention behind it. But what I didn't consider is how many people watch a show. The way people use television is subjective. Somebody on set that was white laughed in such a way. I know the difference of people laughing with me and people laughing at me. And it was the first time I'd ever gotten a laugh that I was uncomfortable with. I know all these people be watching TV, that there's a lot of people who will understand exactly what I'm doing. Then there's another group of people, they're gonna get something
Completely different.
completely different. I don't want black people to be disappointed in me.
So that was Dave Chappelle talking about how he had to re-examine his use of controversial language, such as the N-word or blackface. And other comedians have talked about how they've had similar revelations. Not that you need to delete any word from your vocabulary, or that you can't use these things in comedy at all, but that there should be some level of discretion or consideration when using certain language in front of a large audience. Now keep all of that in mind when watching this.
I had written a sketch that had the word.
As a quick aside, I normally wouldn't censor these words. The reason I have is because they're gonna get a lot of play in the next couple of minutes. If I were to have so many of them on one YouTube video, I have a feeling that YouTube might limit its reach.
David, there's no way that you can ever say the word fat on our network. Why is it that I can say the word with impunity, but I can't say the word fat? And she said, because, David, you are not gay. I said, well, Renee, I'm not a nigger either.
Okay, stop. This joke makes no sense. Now, if his point is just that anyone should be able to say any slur, it just depends on the context in which you use it, then that's fine. But I don't think that's the point he makes. Notice that to counter the lady's stipulation that he can't say the word fat because he's not gay, Dave doesn't say, well, I say the N-word and I'm not black. Obviously, right? Nor does he say, well, you don't have to be black to say the N-word. If he had said that, it might lose some of its humorous punch, but at least the joke would make sense. Instead, he says, but I'm not a nigger either. So already the comparison kind of falls apart. It feels like with this joke, Chappelle somehow misses the point that, in a similar manner to how the N-word or blackface can be used in a derogatory way or to demean black people, the F-slur is used towards gay people. Dave may not see himself as a but he is black, and for some people, for racists, he is a and he has shown in the past that he understood that. So in the same vein, for homophobes, gay people are fat. That's why people should maybe exercise some caution when using these words in front of a large crowd, especially if you're not a part of the group that the slur targets, because it has a higher chance of empowering some bigoted ideas. I feel weird regurgitating Dave's own argument back to him here, but I guess he only applies it for things that target black people. Again, not really triggered or offended by his joke, and I do think that anyone can say any slur in comedy. But what Dave said doesn't make any sense, and it contradicts what he has previously said, which makes it really hard for me as a viewer to find it funny, because it doesn't ring true at all. Okay, now don't make the "it's just jokes, you're reading too much into this" argument. You're better than that. That's bullshit. You know that's bullshit. Because the type of joke that Dave is doing here relies on an internal logic, an internal consistency, and a premise that rings true, even if it's slightly exaggerated or hyperbolic, right? That's where the comedy in the joke comes from. There are people that are clapping along and laughing because they're like, oh yeah, it's funny. It's funny because it's true.
It's funny because it's true.
And I'm saying it's not funny because there's holes in the logic and it doesn't ring true. You know what? Bill Burr actually explained this concept really well.
You know those dumb white guy, black guy jokes? And it's always like the white guy's like, oh, Jesus, I gotta do my taxes. Can this chair hold me? The black guy's always like, you need to loosen up. You gotta relax, man. You just gotta let it happen. All right? It's always the same stupid fucking joke. I hate those jokes, you know, because they're easy. And it's been my experience that it's just not true.
Now, speaking of easy jokes, I want to look at just one more bit from Chappelle's special that caught a bit of flack.
I feel bad for tease. This idea that a person can be born in the wrong body, they have to admit that's a fucking hilarious predicament. If it happened to me, you'd laugh, wouldn't you? What if it did? What if I was Chinese, but born in this body? That's not funny. And for the rest of my life, I had to go around making that face. Hey, everybody, I'm Chinese. This is how I feel inside.
Ah, a classic I identify as joke. That hasn't been overdone. But again, the joke makes no sense. Like, Dave, what are you doing, mate? Let's examine this joke, okay? If he was quote-unquote born Chinese but in his black body, but presumably he'd still be brought up in America, right? So why would he have a silly Chinese accent? The only reason Chinese people speak like that is because they were brought up speaking Chinese as their first language. It's weird because he's actually tying like ethnicity to an accent. In which case, Dave, why aren't you speaking in an African accent like this, huh? Holy cringe. If he just wanted to try a Chinese accent, then whatever, do that. But as an analogy for trans existence, it was stupid as fuck. Like, this bit just kinda equates transgender people to being the same as acting out a racial stereotype. I wouldn't even say this is transphobic, because he clearly shows some sympathy for their plight. But, as Dave himself has said, the way people use television is subjective, and with this kind of joke, the kind of laugh it garners may be coming from a weird place. You know what, Dave shouldn't have even limited himself to just identifying as a different race. He should have tried something even wackier, like identifying as an inanimate object. Oh, I bet you guys have never heard this before. I sexually identify as an attack helicopter. Hell yeah, that's a good one. That's that real comedy right there. See, and that's the thing. Most critics just express disappointment because they expect better than overdone, shitty, tired one-liners. The kind that I would have made as a 17-year-old in 2013. I don't care if some no-name Twitter user said he was cancelled and got a couple of hundred likes from their circle-jerking ultra-woke friends. Don't pretend like they mean anything. But from like professional critics who write for large publications, or in general for people with a significant platform and outreach, I didn't see too many of them try and cancel him. All I saw was criticism. And it's not just that they're bad, overused jokes that happen to subjectively not click with me. So the issue is, and what makes it especially unfunny, is his misunderstanding of the subject matter. It's really difficult to wrap your head around what it means to be transgender, and that's completely understandable, because it is a complicated topic, one that's fairly new and most people can't grapple with it. And that doesn't mean you can't make jokes about transness, because I agree with him, it is a funny situation and there's a lot of comedy you can draw from that. But it's tough to do if you don't have anything beyond like a really shallow understanding. It's funny because this is something Chappelle was always great at doing when it comes to issues of race relations or of black identity. He was always edgy and provocative, but he also had cutting and poignant things to say because he understood the interactions involved. And the best comedy, in my opinion, ultimately has to come from a place of understanding what you are talking about. Are we losing some great higher form of comedy if we started to phase out the I identify as kind of jokes? Probably not. There's probably other funny things we could do. I want to get something out of the way. It's not like you can't do any edgy shit these days. Like, just look at the kind of stuff a show like It's Always Sunny has been able to quote-unquote get away with. Like blackface, or jokes about how one of the characters is going to basically pressure women into having sex when they don't want to, and you know.
They can't refuse because of the implication.
I don't know, it seems to me that nothing's really off the table these days. It just depends what the joke is and what sort of mindset it's likely to empower. It's funny because a lot of the very best comedians, the ones that are generally held in high regard, that are also often viewed as very anti-PC, actually agree with this sentiment.
But his targets are underdogs, and comedy traditionally has picked on people in power, people who abuse their power. Women and gays and immigrants are kind of, to my way of thinking, underdogs. I think that's what is at the core of that experience that takes place in these arenas, is a certain a sharing of anger and rage at these targets. And I'm sure Andrew isn't that angry at them. I'm sure he's playing it as a comic.
They talk about what they do, not what they are. People do some crazy shit, you talk about the crazy shit. But if you think they are, you know what I mean?
I don't know about all.
It's a little harder.
Are we too politically correct?
I don't think so. I know this is unpopular for comedians to say, but I think that political correctness in this country has gotten more and more powerful over the past couple decades, but a lot of great things have come out of it. You know, you look at gay rights, you look at transgender acceptance, a furthering of racial equality, and it makes my job harder, but I don't want my job to be easy. As a comic, I want it to be difficult. I want the obstacle course to be master level.
I think there's like a weird fetishization today of whether or not a joke is appropriately offensive, or will this trigger enough people? I think there's a contingent of comedy fans who don't really find enjoyment or humor in the joke itself, but in whether or not the joke might annoy people. And there seems to be a pretty big market for that now. Pretending as though you're saying some really brave things that might get you in a lot of shit is seemingly a prudent business decision, and a surefire way to excuse lazy and sometimes harmful jokes. Let's look at Shane Gillis, someone who was recently hired by SNL, and there was some backlash to that because he had some edgy jokes about Asians, except he wasn't really making any clever but possibly offensive jokes. He just seemed like he was complaining that Asian people exist.
Damn, Chinatown's fucking nuts.
It's crazy, dude.
It is full fucking China. Dude, it's
Yeah.
fucking Chinese down there.
Thing
Let
that's-
the fucking chinks live there, huh?
Well, they built these fucking like huge Shanghai house. The first one must
Yeah.
have infuriated everyone. They were like,
I'd piss
what
now.
the
I go
fuck?
down there, I'm like, what are you guys doing here? Get these ducks out of that window.
You know what? Yeah, true.
And then SNL fired him. I mean, I personally think that firing him is probably a step too far, but that's the closest thing to a horrible canceling we have. And all it meant was that a less than mediocre comedian didn't get to work for SNL, as if they need more of those. And all of this probably helped his career, because now he gets to play the free speech martyr. In a lot of cases where people complain that they're being unfairly cancelled due to modern sensitive culture, it's mostly just that people are viewing their work a little more critically, and that they're held a little more accountable than they have been in the past. You see this especially with some out-of-touch boomers, that when it's presented that just because of their former success they aren't entitled to everyone's unending applause, they resort to, well, it can't be that my joke was shit. Nah, it's outrage PC culture. And that is the myth of anti-PC comedy. That some of these guys, and especially some of their fans, aren't actually anti-PC or anti-woke outrage. What they are is anti-criticism. Whether that's criticism of their jokes or their worldview, which can sometimes go hand in hand. People trying to cancel does still happen. I'm not saying this phenomenon doesn't exist. Online communities trashing a person and dismissing them as an irredeemable bigot piece of garbage rather than criticizing specific actions. You know, that sucks. That's not a good thing. But I think that and the everything is too PC shtick is blown way overboard. And it's getting to the point where I feel like that's just a popular sentiment you abuse, pander to a certain kind of crowd and expand your fan base. At the end of the day, I feel like comedian Anthony Jeselnik has the right approach to all this. In the light of increased accountability, be funnier, get better. Alright, subscribe, bell, Twitter, check out my other videos. Bye.